brilliant.
I'll make.
Well, this is our geospatial meetup group. It's a little crazy today because apparently there's tornadoes in Juliana's area. Bruce is on an airplane. I don't know what's going on, but as long as people show up to the room, I'm happy to keep us together and chat for up to an hour. Did we have a topic today, Tim?
Well, one of the things we were thinking about doing was other like YouTube resources, but we just did book resources last time. So maybe it was a little too tight. But yeah, if anyone has any good resources that they like to use, I'm happy to share something that we are right in the midst of doing that I would be curious if it would apply to the GIS group out here. But otherwise, Bonnie, why don't you tell us what you've been working on here recently?
Sure. I'm Bonnie. I'm a geospatial analyst, O'Reilly author. It's becoming closer and closer, and now they want me to teach a class, so it's getting real, folks.
What's the book's release date? And hi, I'm now here.
Oh, hi, Juliana. Well, don't pressure me, Juliana. I'm still writing it. I'm turning in chapter 6, and there's about 10 to 12 chapters, but as soon as I see something new, I grab it and pull it in. They're doing early release. They're starting early release, so I'll keep everyone in the loop with that. And I'm also starting some weekly or bi-weekly discussions where I talk about some of the topics in the book. So uh, we'll start there. Now, some of the resources I use, are you talking about the YouTube things, Tim? Tim.
Sorry,
So
I was on mute.
I
Yeah,
think
anything. Yeah, just
any resources.
Now, I've listed mine before. I've listed if you're a Python person, everyone's throwing money at people so they can learn Python. They're paying all this money for these whatever these, I'm not even going to call anyone out, but these courses and these like boot camps. And I'm telling you, the best one out there is Dunder Data. And the reason he's so good and he's on YouTube is you can get so much of it for free too. And then if it's your thing, you could pay just a little bit. I mean, I was lucky. I was in New York when he was doing one of his workshops, so I got to do an on-site thing. He's just brilliant. And so if Python's your thing and you want to learn, then go. He's a great resource. Also, I think both Juliana and I have mentioned, I know I'm killing his name, Ujaval. um, he's brilliant. I'll have to put the links out. He's very, very good because he does really nice tutorials on LinkedIn. He's also not LinkedIn, on YouTube, and he's also very accessible. Like, I had code that wouldn't run, and he tried it and he's like, "You're right. I don't know why I didn't catch that. Let's work on this." And he does it, and then he'll re-release it. And for like $100, you could license some of his stuff. Like, if you want to learn it, and I don't have time for this, but if you wanted to learn it and pull it over into a notebook or create some kind of thing for your own website, it's very accessible to do that sort of thing. Um, and all right, now I'm getting little pings that we're going to talk about stories, but let me just finish with these because they're really, really quick. Anita Grazier, if you're Python, and I can't say his name right, Kuxing Wu, who's absolutely brilliant. If you're interested in any of these people that integrate Python capabilities into geospatial, just reach out to me and I'll give you proper links instead of my list of mispronunciations. But another topic we were excited to explore was how do you develop your stories? How do you develop your data stories for your geospatial? And I'll let Juliana take it from there since she roped me back in.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, I'm just gonna put a plug out there for those of you who are here. If you go to www.geospatialconnections.com, we have a form to sign up for our sort of non-existent mailing list. But what's really helpful about that is that you can suggest a topic for us, and we would love to actually gear our topics to things that you're curious about. But this morning I was listening to a podcast, and it was all about sort of why stories matter. But I realized, sorry, I don't know where I'm going with that. I guess what I've realized recently
Which podcast? Which podcast?
It was the Story Brand, which is like a marketing company, and they're all about how to use stories. But and so they were sort of talking about the power of narrative, which sort of got this in my brain. But what I realized was like a story really matters. And so if you think about right now, at least in the US, we've got COVID cases that are rising. And at least anecdotally, what I've heard is that, that news media as well as public health agencies and hospitals are really showcasing the stories of people who are in ICU units and are like, hey, I wish I had been vaccinated. And that is apparently a really powerful story that is actually getting people vaccinated, right? Like nothing was sort of like working for them before, but it seems like that sort of personalized story of what's happening to a person is really being motivational. And so we oftentimes talk about data storytelling, right? Like those are sort of like these keywords, but I think that there's, a lot that's really, really important in terms of how we talk and think about data. So yeah, anyway, just sort of curious what your thoughts are. How do you frame data storytelling, et cetera?
Hey, Tim, do you want to pick that up, or you want me to talk about it
Yeah,
quickly
you go
before we?
ahead. You go ahead, Bonnie, and then I've got I can follow up with some.
Well, the funny thing for me is that, like I've mentioned before, is I came to geospatial solely out of needing a tool to tell a story. Like I thought I was a healthcare data analyst. I went into the Epic, health systems. I got to look at all this great data. Look at me, I'm living the dream. And then I realized that that level of interrogation was not revealing the foundational and structural elements that were driving the disparities. And that's when I need who's got the blender going over there. Sounds like
Oh,
someone's making. Sounds like a margarita in the making. So anyway, I started looking at a lot more things about climate change and how neighborhoods are constructed, and what do the rich neighborhoods look like that the poorer ones don't. And it's just using raster information and vectors and the vast amount of census data that we have at our census tips at our fingertips. And now what I do might be a story about a lot of those things, but I don't know what to call myself anymore, because you don't really look right away and see the health and the medical interrogation until much later in the story. So we were just curious about how other people develop the stories around how they decide the projects they're doing, with the understanding that I'm a consultant, I'm independent, and I teach workshops, so I have a bit of a freedom to kind of explore what interests me. Some of us might be working in climate change or utilities or something else, but I think we all need to start with a story, whether it's a story map or not. And I think that would be a nice conversation to have. Now, Tim, I know you wanted to add something.
I'm honestly super excited to get Tim's perspective as our Gubby, but also serve as our IT person. Just because I think that there's, at times, right, I can just sort of like be more journalistic and just sort of like tell this story, but that I think Tim can be a little bit more constrained by the real world, if that makes sense.
We'll see. We'll just have to see about that, shall we? No, I do have a question for Bonnie and Juliana too, but I work with an app dev team as well as a GIS team, and what we try to do is understand what the real story is. When the user comes and asks us to do something, sometimes that's often you need to fix a problem that we have. But you almost have to kind of dig in a little deeper. Like, what is why are you having this problem? What is it? What is it that you want to do? Sometimes we build something from scratch. And if you have the full narrative, right, I want this done so I can so I can solve this problem or answer this question, or if to understand the bigger picture, because it's too easy for us, particularly as GISers, just to start, you know, loading up the app, throwing some data in there, and just like, is this what you want? Is this what you want? Is this what you want? But if you take a little extra time to understand why they're asking that request, why that request is being made, or why you're trying to share this information to them, then you might be able to pick the right path. So instead of doing a lot of just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what sticks, maybe you can just do two or three things and really make your time a lot more efficient. And I think it also will create a greater bond with your customer. Now, I have the advantage, or I have a advantage, because I work with customers every day. My direct customers are in the same building that I'm in right now. So I have an opportunity to get direct feedback. Bonnie, you're writing a book. You may not get feedback until till you write it. I know you're getting feedback with your publishers and things like that, but I'm kind of curious to the mods here. When you start a project, whether it's one of Juliana's passion projects or if it's one of Bonnie's data projects that she does, why are you doing it? And what, like, was it a request? And did you know what it was going to look like before you started, or did it turn into something, evolve into something as it finished? So I'll toss that back to the mods and see what they have to say about it.
Well, what I can say is, what I'm usually hired for, I think might help that. I've never had any, well, no, that's a lie. Usually people will ask me to speak at a, like something data viz or even some geospatial, sci-pi, things like that. And they'll ask me, well, what are you going to do? Is it going to be technical? Is it going to be story, whatever? And I usually look at whatever the theme of the event is, and I try to make something that has an edge that aligns with it. But the data I fill it with is my own. So I realized early on that if I said, "Oh, I'm going to talk about racial bias and algorithms," they're going to, before this last year, they would have been like, "Well, I don't know. That's a really small market, blah blah." But I just put the data in, and I reveal what the data shows. I will just use some kind of algorithm that partition patients or people in a certain way. And then together, collectively, they learn the skill of how I would go about examining the data, holding the tension, trying to find out if I have the data I need, does the data I want even exist? So they're boots on the ground. They're not just seeing a beautiful visualization or a map, ta-ta, they're looking at, like, well, the questions you have to ask, the questions you have to reformulate because you don't have the data to ask them, and the transparency you need through the whole process to be credible. Like, I'm trying to think of the one I'm working on now is the wildfires in California, looking at the history of the wildfires, looking at the floodplains in the area, looking at the rain, looking at the tree cover, looking at, how old is that ground cover. This is all great questions for geospatial. Before I knew geospatial, I just would have been like, hey, look, fire there, fire there. Isn't that horrible? Look at all the fires. I mean, I wouldn't be able to present any sort of a solution. And let me just close with one thing that I just learned today. I'm also a member of the National Press Club, and we were talking about numbers in journalism. And we have solution journalism is a thing. Whereas before, you could just say anything and people would like buy the paper, buy the journal, buy whatever because it said something like, talking head on a pillow, and people go, oh wow, I got to see what that's all about. Well, now it's not business that they're looking at. Now it's like peer to peer, like these things like Substack, and consumers are looking to pay for the news and the stories that they like, and they're saying the ones that resonate the highest with them are solutions, not whining and like, look at this and look who did this and don't these people suck, but more like, hey, you know what? This looks like this. Maybe we should point towards that. And geospatial, to me, is at the front of the line for that. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking. I'll let you guys pick up.
Oh, Bonnie, I just love your perspective, and I think it's such a good sort of a breath of fresh air. I do want to just invite others who are in the room to raise your hands. This session is being recorded, so just to be aware of that, which we make these available on YouTube afterwards. But so for
And on our webpage, right? Is it on our webpage?
and they are now. It is on our webpage. You can find all that on www.geospatialconnections.com. So yeah, so I think one of the things that I have sort of struggled with is like letting the data talk. In terms of, so I guess for context for people, in my day job, I work for a large company, grocery company, and I work as a data analyst. And then on the side, I run a consulting firm, and I'm sort of figuring out which some things within my own life, but within my day job, a lot of what I do is just like mathematical modeling of figuring out where we should put stuff in the future. And I think one thing that I really realized a lot of, which it relates to what Tim said, was just like really understanding who my clients and customers are. So who are the people who are going to be ingesting this data? So while this may seem like a small thing, right, we model down at a block group level, but actually my consumers don't understand what a block group is. And so if you're in the US, you presumably know what a block group is, which is the lowest level of sort of aggregation that you can get sort of census data at. So it's pretty small. And then you have the zip code, which is like the postcode area, which is a lot bigger. And my clients really like that zip code data. And so that's been something I've really struggled with in terms of telling a story, because I think that like a lot of information is missed, but that really understanding that my customers really want that data at that zip code level because that's what makes sense to them. And so trying to show them how they can get more information, and I don't know if that's making sense, but that idea of like really understanding your customer that Tim mentioned is really speaking.
No, you bring up a really good point, Juliana. As that there's better data than zip code, but they don't, right? The customer doesn't, because they recognize zip codes, right? That's familiar to them. And so you mentioned something that you share. Well, I can get more data. The data can tell a better story if we look at the block group or the block level, for some of that information. I mean, have you had success with that? Or do they like, no, just keep it at zip code and we're fine?
Well, I think I've been able to demonstrate a bit of a challenge, which I can't really go into this because of potentially like proprietary information, but that in terms of a way that we were aggregating information, like uh they were like, oh well, like this doesn't make sense to us. I was like, well, that's because it makes sense at the block group level, it doesn't make sense at the zip code level. I know I'm speaking in abstractions and I can't figure out how to sort of explain it without potentially giving away the way part of the way that we do our business. But I think in part it's trying to say this is why this data is useful for me to solve this problem, and why I think that this is really important, but you may be trying to solve a different problem. And I mean, for us, it's just sort of, we're forecasting demand and we're forecasting other things, which maybe that's just the level that it needs to be at. But in terms of like where I want us to go, which is actually like doing analysis and doing, really understanding the relationships between places, I think actually having that lower level data is going to be important.
Well, and also a lot of block groups are smaller than zip codes, obviously. So it depends on, there's so much more data in the census block group data because it's linked to all the census block information. And I'd be very curious to see how a client might respond to, like you said, why the zip code. The zip codes don't really have hard boundaries, right? A block, we know what a block is. We know a lot about it. We know the boundaries, we know who's in it, who's out of it. Zip codes are a little smushy. You move in and out of zip codes, arbitrarily often. So they don't really have a lot of, like on a map, they don't really make a lot of sense.
Well, so that you're actually bringing up like one of the really good points, and why I think actually understanding your client is really important. So for me, like block groups make sense, right? I mean, in terms of the ways that we develop our census geographies, that makes so much sense to me, right? Because they're sort of based on the human lived experience. But if you within much of retail, they're just so used to maybe not taking that spatial perspective, or taking right, and so that you're taking spatial in terms of you have your spreadsheet and you have, zip code, blah, 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 has that, had this number of sales or whatever. But to them, like, there's just so many systems that are built around that zip code that to them, they just can't even understand. But also if you think about like direct mail or other things, like you can target that at a zip code level, maybe a zip +4, but like I can't say I want to target everyone, or you can't as easily say I want to target everyone in this block group with my mailer about my dentist, about my new dental office.
Yeah, I hope that all goes away because like zip codes are really just for mail. They're not geographic boundaries at all. They just map how mail is delivered. So in that example you gave, then yes, obviously they want those zip codes. But they also have zip code tabulation areas that are a geographic entity. So depending on, and a lot of times we have to educate our client. Like they could come to you and say, I want zip codes. And you could say, well, let me explain something to you and let me show you how maybe the tabulation area is what you actually need, not the actual zip code. You know what I mean? So it's really important for people to understand that if that's their only link to like quote unquote a geographic code, it really isn't one if you're just using zip codes.
Right.
I'm
And
Bonnie and
so
I'm done talking.
fun fact about zip codes, for those of you, again, who are in the US, is that a zip code is actually not defined as an area. It's like its technical definition is not a polygon. Its actual definition is a polyline. Um, so that's also fun. Like we
Yeah,
oftentimes use them as
that's because of the
polygons.
root. It's actually a
Yeah,
male.
right, because it's
Yeah.
defined by roots, which sort of goes beyond like, I know that to be true. Sort of difficult to sometimes fathom that and fully understand what that means. But I do think though, it's recognizing that like I can push the I can push the needle forward in certain ways, but I'm also limited in terms of how I as an individual can push things forward. So I'm going to do the analysis at the block group level because heck, I think that that's what's important, and I'm going to bring that expertise to bear. But I am also going to recognize like you are my client, you have particular business systems and processes, and I need to really like this is where some of those soft skills come into play in terms of working with them, persuading them, showing them how this other data could be useful, but also being like, okay, great, like we are not going to budge on the zip code issue, so I'm going to make your zip code data the best data that I can. I'm Juliana, and I'm done.
So this is perfect. This is what I was, so sometimes we as GISers get a request. I want a zip code map of this. But if we understand why they want this zip code map, I mean, I guarantee you they want the zip code map because it's familiar to them. Everything y'all said about zip codes is absolutely right. It's not really a good, but people know it. I mean, that's their address. They've always had a zip code their whole lives. They understand it. That's their level of geography. We deal with it all the time when we assign addresses. Well, I don't live in that city. Well, your zip code goes outside the city, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but what Juliana could do, or, and maybe she has done, is when someone makes that kind of request for that level of data, go, well, what are you trying to do? Or like, what are we trying to solve here? And then go solve it. And if you solve it with block group data or some other, proprietary data that you have within your environment, then solve it. And then maybe zip codes, like you don't need zip codes, but if it starts as a zip code, then it's hard to break through. But if you can say it as, well, what do let me solve your problem and let me show you what we're trying to see here. And I'm not asking you to divulge any proprietary secrets, Juliana, but then maybe you deliver it in a way that's not zip codes because you solve their problem. And then if they ask for zip code, I ask for zip codes, I give it to them. Then that's it, that part's easy. But at least now they've been aware, that there are other ways to see the information and other ways to solve the
Yeah,
problem.
no, absolutely. So for this, I mean, and this is what I was working on this morning, and what I'll go back to this afternoon. Um, it's a Tableau file that I'm giving someone, and so the data first, like the data is all coming in, and we're doing it at a block group level, and then we have the crosswalk between block groups and zip codes, which is a bunch of fun and not really fun at all. So that right, I try and force them to first see it at the block group level, and then I then give them the option to then look at it at the zip code level. But sort of like that first tab is at the block group, as the way to try and encourage them and see that new way of looking at the data.
And I would argue also that I bet you a lot of these people don't know the difference between a zip code tabulation area and a zip code because they map almost directly. I mean, there's only about maybe 10% that don't. But this is what they're looking at when they see it. But the zip code tabulation area is a polygon, a geographic boundary, but the zip code is not. And if they're doing anything with census data, like, the American Community Survey or the Diennial or anything like that, they're not even working with zip codes, and they probably don't even realize the difference. But the zip code tabulation area stays constant for 10 years. Why would you want to use something that's so ethereal that it might not be measuring what it measured 3 years ago? So the zip code tabulation area is what you actually need if they're like wanting to do some kind of time, interval or comparator. Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Bonnie, I wish. Sometimes I just think I want to just do consulting for companies on like basic geographic data and just be able to just like come along the side the GIS analyst or like the data analyst who's been saying these things for years, like right, like I have been doing in my current organization, but they're not going to listen to me, but like they'll listen to some like bigwig consultant. So anyway, if anyone here needs to hire a consultant to come tell your boss you should use zip code tabulation areas, you should use block group data, I am happy to come be that person. I'm very personable. But anyway, just to refresh the room, welcome to the Geospatial Connections Club. We meet every Wednesday at this time on Clubhouse for an hour-long chat about things geospatial. This week we are talking about telling a data story, but would love suggestions from you in terms of things you'd like for us to talk about. So I don't know if you know this, but there's now like an in-app messaging feature in Clubhouse. So if you click my picture and then let me actually click on Tim's picture. If you click on anyone's picture and then there's like a paper airplane next to their face, you can then send them a message. So if you want to send Tim, Bonnie, or I a message, I'm just saying, hey, I'd love it if you talked about blah, blah, blah. That would be really great. But would also love to know if anyone wants to raise their hand and talk about the ways that they've told stories with data. This is being recorded. It will be put on our website and on YouTube so that other people can watch it. So just want you to be aware of that.
Hey, Juliana, Bonnie, I'd love to share a horrendous failure, a recent one,
Woohoo, my
about
favorite
my
kind.
my data story. So we really, because we're a county, the health authority in Texas is at the county level. They have a state agency, but all the local stuff is happening here. So right when COVID hit, we were all in, and we really saw an opportunity here for that to be, you know, GIS to the rescue kind of stuff. Still believe that. But the failure was, and I was kind of leaning toward what Juliana was saying. Like the lower the data, the better. So what we had was we actually had real cases, COVID cases, and Esri came out with this sort of risk layer, risk surface, and I really liked it. I think they did it in Hong Kong. I'm like, I want to do a risk surface for my county. Hell, let's do it for the whole region. And so part of this Esri tool that they gave me, which I didn't realize, consumed credits and lots of them, depending on how deep you go. I'm like, I'm going to the block level, and that thing ran for a few hours for the Dallas Fort Worth region. And next thing I know, I've got my GIS supervisor calling me. He's like, "What the hell happened to my credits?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "They're gone. They're all gone." And the fail part wasn't so much the credit, so we could deal with that. Was I went too granular. There was no value in that level of data, for what I was trying to do. I wanted to see where this risk surface was, and I really needed to do it at probably the block level, or not, or maybe even the tract, if I wanted to use census data, not the block level. Block group or census tract probably would have made more sense. So not only did I burn through all of our credits, I ended up with a data set that was useless. And now, fortunately, I was able to call Esri. I'm like, hey, I was trying something. Can I undo? And they actually refunded me some credits, which which made my GIS guy a little happier. But yeah, so that if I would have done just a pilot area, right, just to kind of, I just went big right away, and it was a mistake. The lesson here is if you're going to try something like that, try different levels in a small area for one, so you don't burn all your credits, and two, you don't have to waste hours waiting for it to process to realize it was bad to begin with. So those are hopefully lessons you can take home with you. And I'm done.
You never told me that story. I always use the caveat like why I focus so much on QGIS. It's because I had a horrible story with credits moving a spreadsheet over from a client, and they went and geocoded the whole thing. The system did, and then I was left like creditless and kind of on in the red. And so, what I tend to do now is do smaller exploratory um, Python, with the Python API in ArcGIS Online. And what I do is I sign in anonymously and I look around. And then I find out, because you can't really do any analytics or anything in the anonymous. You can look at things that have already been created by other people, which sometimes is all you need. You can also see the data that you could pull over into QGIS and do it without the credit countdown. Um, but I don't know that API. I probably should shut up about Python because I don't know how many people even use it. But the API is just brilliant because you can actually sign into your actual ArcGIS account without having to open up Pro and do a lot of sophisticated level calculation. And when you're consuming the credit, but and I'll end on this, they just restructured their whole personal subscription that gives you more access to more things. And it comes with a heftier credit balance, especially if you end up getting a developer license. You have a generous, not, compared to the enterprise level, but compared to like, Joe Blow consultant on the street like me. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Marlon, what do you have to share with us?
Hi guys, how are you? Good to hear all your stories. I must say that I'm very much intrigued by Bonnie's last point before I make my point here about and it may be a topic of conversation, what can be and cannot be done signing in or not signing it as an anonymous to AGOL. I think that is a fantastic topic. But anyways, I never thought of it that way. So thank you for that tip. My data story that I want to share today is, so we have, weekly, so first of all, I need to, I guess, tell that my name is Marlon. I work for Chester County. I'm the GIS architect. So that's the background there. And we do have weekly meetings, management meetings. All the leads get together, and our CIO is there, and he always drives us on. Are you looking at your statistics? How are you improving your business processes? What are you doing? How can you be more innovative? Blah 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 blah. The list goes on. So I have put and I've attended some seminars recently in the last 6 months. We recently put together a GIS Internal Dashboard, which is about capturing movement on our cadastral SDE data set. So we do have a parcel viewer, just like probably all the counties have, that is being updated on a frequent and regular basis, where we capture, mapped parcels in active layers, retired parcels, active new parcels, remapped deeds, realigned, blah, blah, blah. So this dashboard captures the movement of data within SDE, and it's real time, and you can go and identify your time period from to, and will spit out all the statistics on map layers, new parcels, retired parcel realigned did. Very, very successful, very well received. So that's what I'll share today.
Thank you, Marlon. Jordan, tell us your data story.
Oh, so I've got a great data story. I'm Jordan. I'm a senior GIS analyst at a municipality. This is a story about a different municipality. Um, so basically, we had the idea for one of our small departments to get some GPS trackers on their vehicles, and not necessarily, just so we know where they are, but so we could give them some value added products. um, and so in this, I guess, this internal pitch that I'm doing, I'm explaining, like, what is the value of GPS, right? Of, like, not only do we know where our people have been, for liability reasons, like, oh, your city vehicle scratched my car. It's like, oh, we were never there. But you can start uh, doing some batch processes of knowing that, hey, we have to inspect all of these subdivisions every X number of weeks, right? So we can say with certainty that we drove through your subdivision to look for code violations 2 weeks ago, and we're scheduled to be back there in another 2 weeks or something like that. So I had this suite of all these different deliverables that we could theoretically do with GPS units, and the pitch, the internal pitch, works so well that we're like, okay, great, we're going to outfit the entire fleet, um, of whatever 50 vehicles that we had with GPS units, which was neat, right? But then it got into this problem of, like, oh, that's a lot of data. What do we how are we gonna handle that much data? But I think that the laborious point that I'm trying to make is that if you can paint a picture uh, of what some of the benefits of a technology will be with concrete examples, you can sell people on some stuff that you haven't necessarily proven out. I'm Jordan. I'm done talking.
That's a great story, Jordan. So now that you're at this new municipality, are those lessons learned from the old one?
Uh, I'm a lot less hesitant to sell big things that I'm not quite prepared to implement. So I've been at this new municipality, I've been taking a very piecemeal approach of, we need to do this one thing, and then once we do this one thing, we can start doing another thing. So really, getting the Kanban on and not biting off more projects than I can chew, especially now that I'm a department of one.
That's fantastic. Courtney, your profile says that you are a geospatial storyteller. Tell us all about it.
There we go. Sorry, I hit the message button. Yeah, what let me look at my profile again. I wrote that a while ago. Um I've worked on some various projects with, environmental nonprofits, as well as voting outreach and participatory uh, budgets for, underrepresented geographic communities in the town. So I didn't really come to this Clubhouse meetup with a story today, but what I found is, usually when I talk about what I do, outside of the GIS geospatial community, people, it feels like, in general, in the public, most people are kind of lost until I somehow trace things back to either paper maps or like, you know, a map on a computer that they're pretty commonly used for. And, you know, I thought when I joined this meeting earlier today, you know, someone was talking about how a client wanted to use zip codes, and yeah, I mean, I find most people don't know that zip codes are for the U.S. Postal Service, you know, to organize their routes on how they deliver mail. That's a common thing. Most people don't realize they think it's an actual, you know, polygon area. So but sometimes I use when I talk to people about why zip codes aren't great for on maps. I kind of use that as sort of a pathway to talk about, you know, how network analysis works and how sort of that's like the postal services like old version of that before there really was GIS. So yeah, I don't know, I guess like I do a lot of paper maps. People really occasionally someone will want a chart, but even then people really do want to see that visual element, I find. But I don't know, has anyone else experienced this as well when working with people?
Bonnie, Juliana, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting myself as happens often. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely experienced that. You know, people. I mean, right? What draws people into the power of a map is that like it has an ability to tell the story and to communicate, you know, information in a new way. And so, yeah, I mean, like even like as a user, I was getting really frustrated with my town yesterday because I was trying to look up something about bicycle paths and it wasn't an interactive map and it was a PDF. And I was like, I want to be able to interact with this. And I know that probably other people do as well. I don't know if that's necessarily like what you were asking, but I mean, I think that in general, we like the idea of having interact, like being able to interact and like be able essentially to tell our own story with the data.
And you know, in my case, and it's different. You know, obviously, if you work for a company and you're that's your voice, that's where you come across. But for me, as a writer and a journalist, and a storyteller, you know, I have to curate empathy, which I've said before. But I need, and that doesn't mean like whip out the violins and get people to falsely align with one way of looking at something over another, but maybe them thinking that there is a story where before they just thought something was the way that it was because nobody ever kind of turned it a little bit and showed them a different perspective or a different way of looking at it. You know, one of the first times I did this, it was quite by accident. I was teaching a class on how to use census data. And at the time, my God, I was doing it in Tableau Prep and Tableau. I mean, it was laborious, but this is the course I was teaching. And I ended up wanting to look at all the race designations, the self-reported race in the biennial census. And then I wanted to look at the ethnicity question and then create these, you know, buckets. And the interesting thing was there was more intra race variability than there was inter race variability. Now, I didn't have a story when I set out, but I have a belief system where I'm like, yeah, there's a race. It's called the human race. And that's not supposed to be a kumbaya moment. It's just there was never anything I found in my background as a population geneticist. There was nothing I ever found where I could put a bunch of data, run a result, and say, oh, look, all of this race came out with this finding, and all of this race came out there. None of that even exists in the world. So I just thought, won't it be neat if I actually look at all this census data and see where it leads me? And the audience was along for the ride. I mean, obviously, when you're teaching, you have to run through everything ahead of time to make sure there's no, something horrible that's not going to be, you're not going to be able to run the code, or something's not going to work, or what are you going to do if the internet suddenly gives out? You have to have some hidden slides that, well, like Julia Child, I dropped the meatloaf, here's what it would have looked like if it hadn't dropped, that kind of thing. But it was a really eye-opening way to think of questions, like not coming in with the question and the answer, coming in with the question and the most robust data you can bring to the conversation, and then kind of have the big reveal with the people in the room. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Now, Courtney, I just wanted to share one thing with my. We had been doing. I think someone had mentioned it. This is the way we've always done it. Our one of our elected officials wanted a presentation, and we had done some kind of sort of very menial animation, to kind of show like population growth or something like that over a period of time. And actually, that was something I did, when I was doing more of the analyst work. And I was kind of proud of it, So part of it was my own bias, like, oh, the judge wants the stuff I did, So, but when it's looked through a different lens, like my coworker, he's like, I'm going to just I'm not going to make these maps anymore. I'm not going to make these images for PowerPoint. I'm just going to send him a web app, of the same information that he can go through and do it himself. And I'm like, oh, okay, he didn't really ask for that, and he loved it because it was just it solved the problem, and maybe what I was doing in my own bias didn't, or I thought it did, but there's always new ways of looking at it, and when you include others, and I feel for those that are by themselves, and I want this to be that community for you. But if you're by yourself, you only have like one way to do it, your way. But if you can reach out to others, either on this call during this, Clubhouse, and go, hey, I'm about to try this, will this work? What do you think? If you can get that level of feedback, it's always nice to have a team to work with. And even if you don't have a team, we're your team, right? We're, this community is your team. But if Brett wasn't there to do this new idea, we'd probably still be making those hard copy images for him today. We're now we've moved on, and I couldn't be happier to do so. So I even learned a lesson, and I preach this stuff. Sometimes I get caught up in my own, my own business that I'm hard to get away from. So yeah, it was just nice to give another way of looking at it, and it turned out it was the preferred way, the better way. All right,
Hey, Tim, such a great point there. And just about the power of community. And I'd say over the past year, I really worked on building relationships with people, and that there's some people who I've never met in person who are part of the geospatial community who I can text and just be like, I just need to talk through something quickly with you. And that has just been really invaluable, in part because they can ask questions from a distance, and be and who are also just like invest, who there's that relationship and there's that trust, which sort of relates into our topic for next week, which is about getting buy-in for GIS. And part of the way that I found to get that's really helpful in terms of getting buy-in, right? So whether that's from convincing a client that they need to take a geographic perspective, or how to do a particular type of analysis at work, is to understand what has worked for other people. So that's why we will be discussing that next week. I'm Juliana, and I'm done speaking.
yeah, we figured that. No, it's awkward pause. So those that are still up here on stage, Marlon, Jordan, Courtney, anything else to add here?
Yeah, so earlier in the conversation, someone was talking about how they were trying to convince their client, to use either blocks or block groups. I was wondering, how successful are you for that? Because I've found a lot of people who don't, normally work with, say, census data, that feels a little bit abstract. Like usually when I've done maps displaying that data, I'll include, maybe neighborhood boundaries, or, major highways or major roads, to sort of give them some sort of reference. But I found kind of I have to explain how those things work. And then the other issue is the boundaries on those change, every when they redraw things. So I find that's kind of a barrier for using them. I'm wondering just what everyone else's experiences with blocks and block groups are.
At least in this particular instance, I have been 0% effective at convincing this user client of mine that zip codes are really the way to go. I mean, essentially, I could, yeah, and that's because there's whole systems, and it sort of comes down to media buying and other things. But it's for me, it's trying to show them the data in multiple ways and to say this is sort of what we can get from looking at this at a block group level. And okay, maybe for the question you're trying to answer, we're okay just looking at this at a zip code level. So I haven't been super effective, but I have convinced them though of the value of having it and having the analysis done at a block group level, and that's by sort of getting very much in the weeds with them and showing them this is how the analysis came out if I do it at a block group level versus this is how I do it at a zip code level. And so just sort of for clarification for this, I model everything and do all the analysis at a block group, but then I aggregate it up to the zip code. And yes, it's the zip code and not the ZICTA for a variety of reasons that I will go bonkers about if I have to talk about.
I just want to add one point, which kind of piggybacks on what Juliana is saying here, which I challenge my staff all the time to think about the delivery method of what the output is. I mean, most of the time, and we do have some traditional people that still want to have the hard copy map, but in this day and age, where people want to interact with their map, I challenge them, every client, internal or external, that you are giving an output to, I challenge them to create a web map with it that enables the end user to interact with the map, that gives the flexibility of having multi-layer analysis, whether that's zip code, block groups, you can integrate that whole thing. That gives the dynamism and the flexibility of your data change depending on how your web map is configured. The data can be updated. So I just wanted to make the point of having the deliverable being digital and being a web map makes things more scalable, flexible, and that's it. I'm done talking. Thanks.
Marlon, I love it. Here's what we did, and it was kind of a jab, but we make a county map. It goes to a publisher. It's really nicely done. We're real proud of it, but it indeed is it's a piece of paper, as good as the day that we sent the file. What we did, and I'm real happy with this, and like I said, it was just kind of a nod to the technology, is we put a QR code on the map that you can scan to get a digital version of the map. So then you can, look on your phone and zoom in and, cities change. So you actually get the real map. And it was just kind of fun. And it was kind of unique to do was like, hey, why don't we just make a digital, it was our way of putting a digital map on a piece of paper.
That's pretty cool.
That's so great, Tim. I've been thinking a lot about QR codes because I put QR codes on my wedding invitations 4 years ago, and at that point, people were like, "QR codes are dead." But now it seems like with COVID, everything has QR codes on them. But I really love that idea, Tim, of being able to create sort of that hybrid. I mean, I've seen people put QR codes on their business cards. Who knows if people use business cards anymore? But I love that idea of like you're providing the paper map because sometimes you just need a paper map of something, right? But then you're also providing easy access to here's the updated one, and I don't have to go to collincounty.tx.gov/Tim's special map V15 final.
We did something like this around, I think it was a Tableau conference, where we wanted to show where we were going to be doing our runs throughout the conference. But we didn't want to have to tell everybody, like, well, if you're staying at this hotel, then you do this. So we just embedded that so they could see where it was and figure out how at least to get to where we were all congregating. But I mean, that's about as sophisticated as we got with it. So that's a good idea to try to figure out other ways to use something like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't
Thanks.
need to be sophisticated. All we did was just the same county map that we published. It was just that map service and a way to geocode. So you can type in your address and see where you are, and that was it. And you can pan around. It didn't do anything else. I did want to mention one quick thing. I know we're wrapping up with Courtney. Sometimes you get lucky when you include additional data. Early in my career, we had a tornado go through our county. So sorry, Julianne, I know that's something you're dealing with right now. Hopefully that's not happening to you. But and so we wanted to map where the tornado went through town, and I added, kind of on a whim, because in Texas we have commissioners, which are kind of like city council that have geographic representation. So I added the commissioner boundary, just a line, and labeled them to show that here's the tornado line that we think would happen, and it went through these two commissioners. So then those two commissioners could go to their constituents, and they became aware that, oh, that is in my district. I better go deal with that. So that was a plus, Courtney, that we did that no one asked for, but we thought would be useful, and it turned out it was.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, and again, that's if we sort of circle this back to our topic for today, which was storytelling with data, right? You then were able to personalize it and enable the person with authority to then tell a more convincing story of, hey, people who live in, this geographic area, like, I'm now like more invested in this because these are my constituents, but also like, go get in your shelter or, do whatever. So, um, as always, I'm just so thankful for this slice of my lunch hour. I mean, it is my lunch hour. It's not just a slice of it. Every Wednesday. It means a lot that everyone, that you all come out and that we get to have these great conversations. So thank you so much. And I guess, Tim, I'll let you say any last words as I guess you're the lead mod.
Oh, no, I just, again, thanks for everyone to showing up, and for those that participate. That's always what makes these fun, is to hear stories from others, so you don't have to keep hearing us talk all the time. So, again, it's been another fun Wednesday.
Oh,
Bonnie, any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to encourage you all, sign up at geospatialconnections.com, and give us ideas or direct message any of us. I am sort of off of my social media mostly this month, except on Fridays. So if you DM me, it'll take me a little while to get back. But really thankful, and we'll see you next week with sort of the topic of how do you get buy-in, right? I think that's a super great sort of follow-on to this conversation.
And check out the recording over on the website too, because it'll be posted there.
Yes, so you can share this conversation with any friends who missed it.
Fantastic, everybody. Y'all have a good day.